Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. Trevor, Sikkema, Carmen Vitali here with you guys to preview every single game that we got coming up for week 10 in the NFL. Very excited to kind of get to this slate because I've looked at the lines, doing a little, betting myself for Sunday and Monday, and I'm like, I think Vegas is nailing that. Like, they're understanding the matchups. We know these teams really well. So what we're going to do here on this show is we're going to tell you, of course, the matchups that matters, the plus factors, and we're going to try to find those edges for you, whether it is fantasy or betting or like whatever it is, what we think is going to happen in this game and why. Carmen, how you doing as we usher in week 10? How you feeling? I mean, it's like it's week 10 at this point. We're halfway through.
Double digits, man.
I was going to say, you feel good. You feel good about hitting double digits here, second half of the season?
Yeah, everything I feel like is kind of balanced out, which it happens every year. And it's always funny to me that like we very much over or underreact to things in the beginning of the season. And then everything kind of starts to like even out and you start to see the actual sustainable trends. And a lot of times it follows more along the lines of what you might have thought. But I think it's also interesting because this is kind of when the playoff view starts to kind of come into play. And I mean, we know that every year it turns over, like roughly half the teams turn over, but you never know at the beginning of the season who that's going to be. And it's always kind of like unfathomable to think about, some of these teams dropping out and some teams getting in. But now, like, I mean, the Commanders are such a perfect example of like no one in the beginning of the season really like everybody thought that rebuild was going to take a lot longer, and now you're like, no, they're sitting atop the NFC East right now, and they're stable, which is not something we've historically, at least in recent history, associated with the Washington football team, Commanders.
It's
that whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you could throw a dart at any of the names that they've had over the last, since they changed their name the first time, and you'd be correct. I feel like people wouldn't, it'd just go right through their head, and they'd be like, yeah, that's fine, that works. Look, I think that. Starting with Thursday Night Football, I agree with you completely. Like, the Bengals were a team that 3 weeks ago we felt like they were totally out of the running, totally out of the race. It was going to be a disappointing season. And here the Bengals sit at 4-5. Okay, not ideal. You're still under 500, but you still completely control your own destiny. The narratives that we had of teams 3-4 weeks ago of like, oh, they have no chance, they're out of it, all this kind of stuff. We're seeing teams maybe come back from the dead. Maybe we buried them a little bit too early. And I think the Bengals are one of those teams. They're facing off against the Baltimore Ravens. It was an incredible matchup that they had that went to overtime earlier this season. It was one that we thought the Bengals were going to end up winning when Lamar Jackson turned the ball over and they got into field goal range, and then they kind of blundered what they did after that, kind of settling for a super long field goal. Hold wasn't right. Field goal misses. Ravens win a thriller, but it's like
DPI, that's just, all of that.
Right. And there were so many things. That was a true like playoff type of game. And I feel like this one is going to be the same. I know the Bengals might be down a little bit with some of their star players, especially T. Higgins. It looks like, obviously we're doing this show on a Monday, on a Wednesday. So there's a lot of time that could go, or a lot of things that could happen between now and when the ball gets kicked off in over 24 hours. But still, it doesn't look like they're going to get T. Higgins. So
I know
from what we saw last week with the Bengals, which was very good, really 3 of the last 4 weeks have been very good for the Cincinnati Bengals. How much faith do you have in them? And really just what's the matchup that matters here overall for this game?
Yeah, I really thought that despite their slow starts in recent seasons, that first game against the Ravens would be kind of one of those things where they could announce themselves a little bit more and be like, no, we're here to contend and all that other stuff. They didn't do it. So now this makes it kind of a must-win game against the Ravens the second time around. You have to split that series if you want to be taken seriously in the AFC. So I actually go to the other side of things from Cincinnati's pass catchers. I go to Cincinnati's pass defense with Baltimore wide receivers because of the addition that they made before the trade deadline. You got now a more overall well-rounded offense as if you needed it. I mean, this was already the league's best offense, given the fact that they have Lamar Jackson, who was playing better than his MVP season last year. And then on top of that, you have Derrick Henry. But Lamar Jackson is on pace for 4,494 passing yards and 38 passing touchdowns this year. That is absolutely shattering everything that he's done before. He hasn't had a 4,000-yard passing season yet. And he could do that while also getting 1,000 yards rushing, becoming, I believe, the first player to do that. So they're on this crazy pace, and then they're still not content, and they add to the wide receiver room. And with already the second highest EPA per play in receiving. So how do you counter that if you're Cincinnati? And they have a 62.5 coverage grade, which ranks 17th in the league, 69.3% completion rate allowed, which ranks 18th. So they're very average as far as a defense goes, as pass defense goes. And they're going against a very, very above average unit now with a guy that's absolutely slinging it. And for all like at this point, should run away with his back-to-back MVP award, just given how insane the things that Lamar Jackson is doing are.
Well, I'm going to hit you with a Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend, to start the show, because I do completely agree with you that I think that if MVP, if we were voting right now, I think Lamar Jackson would win it once again. But there's a guy that he is playing on Thursday that I think is going to have something to say about that, and that is Joe Burrow. And obviously, I think that certainly how they started the season, it doesn't go well into his resume. However, Joe Burrow's been on fire lately. I mean, he has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, certainly over the last couple of weeks. And that's been, with T. Higgins in there, with T. Higgins not in the lineup. And what was the thing that we were talking about during the early part of the season? When it's not Chase and Higgins out there, you and I talked about that on this show. When it's not both of them out there, the offense just looks so different. Well, they didn't have T. Higgins. They didn't have Jermaine Burton, which is kind of a wild card and it's just a roller coaster in and of itself. And they still looked unbelievable last week because of, I think, two things. One, just how well Burrow is playing. Two, I think Chase Brown is also somebody that we would be remiss if we did not mention him. But Burrow versus the Ravens coverage unit right now, because for as good as the Ravens are as a team and as much as they are what it feels like juggernauts on the offensive side of the ball, when it comes to coverage, 1,088 passing yards allowed. That's sixth most this season. 58 catches allowed for a first down. That's second most. 18 forced incompletions, so they are getting their hands on the ball a little bit. They have that's fifth most in the NFL, but 27 catches of 15 or more yards, second most in the NFL. 7 receiving touchdowns allowed. That is top 12 in the NFL, or bottom 12, I think is probably the better way to say it. What I'm basically trying to say is the Ravens coverage unit is not really a great matchup for them going up against the caliber of quarterback that Joe Burrow is and how he is playing right now. So to me, that's huge, because if the Ravens coverage group does not play better, Joe Burrow can absolutely carve them up. This can be another very close game, even though this one's going to be in Baltimore as opposed to in Cincinnati. And I really do think that Joe Burrow, in a game that a lot of people are talking about Lamar Jackson and a potential second MVP, Burrow is right there. And this is a statement game for Cincinnati, not only to get back at 500 on the season, but also to talk about moving forward. This is going to still be a team to beat in the AFC in their own division. Nothing is out of the question right now for Cincinnati, as much as it really did suck to watch in the early parts of the year. What about a plus factor here for you?
Yeah, last week I think I had Chase Brown as the plus factor for Cincinnati, and that's been the key in kind of unlocking the rest of this offense when you don't have T. Higgins, or you do have some absences along the offensive weaponry or in the offensive arsenal. And now you see that Zach Moss is going to miss time, so the Bengals go out and make just their second in-season trade in like the last, I think since like 1973. I think that's the stat I saw.
Wow.
It's Khalil Herbert from the Chicago Bears, who was not utilized with the addition of DeAndre Swift there. Chicago now has the two-headed backfield in Swift and Roschon Johnson as kind of their change-up third down short yardage back. That kind of left Khalil Herbert, who was very productive for them last year, as the odd man out. So now Cincinnati goes and gets him to complement Chase Brown. And again, this is just about opening up things for the Cincinnati offense to allow Joe Burrow to still connect with Jamar Chase, because the defenses still have to respect the run. That's going to be key, I think, as the Cincinnati Bengals offense moves forward. And I don't want to, we've kind of like glossed over the Ravens rushing attack, and we know that is the crux of why the Ravens are rolling as much as they are.
Right.
But we really need to make yourself as multidimensional as possible going against this Ravens defense, which is very, very good as well. And that's why I think the plus factor here is Khalil Herbert / just the Cincinnati Bengals run game in general. They're only averaging 4.08 yards per carry right now, which ranks 24th in the league. But I would look for that to go up with the addition of Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, on the other side of things for the Ravens, maybe getting Keaton Mitchell back this week, which is great to see. Tore his ACL in December last year. Really dynamic running back. somebody who I liked when he was coming out of ECU in the draft. And so to get him back is just another weapon and some more juice that they have in their rushing attack, which, like you said, is the crux of exactly what they want to do on the offensive side of the ball. So really cool if Keaton Mitchell can. Well, it seems like he's coming back at some point this year, over whether it's this week or next week. But if we could see him in Thursday Night Football, that would be a really cool accomplishment and really cool for him to get back out on the field. But my plus factor here, it's not Keaton Mitchell, it's actually Amarius Mims, and really it's more of just the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line overall because when you look at this group, I think they're playing better in certain ways. I think that Amarius Mims himself is playing better at that right tackle spot, but they're going up against a Ravens defensive line that is a really good unit, I think, collectively. Obviously, they've got some stars along that defensive line, starting with Nani Madubuike and some other guys that are really stepping up. But I think it's more of a collective for Baltimore that makes a really good feared front. The Bengals offensive line, they played a little bit better. What was it, last week, I think? But week 7 and week 8, when they were playing the Eagles defensive line and the Browns defensive line, which are more talented defensive lines than the Raiders, when even with Max Crosby last week, they posted some pretty poor overall blocking grades. And I don't want to say that the Raiders defensive line is like, oh, it's one of the worst in the NFL. It's definitely not. And that's why I think that this is a plus factor here, because Mims played well against Crosby and just against that group overall. So maybe it is sort of a, hey, we're getting better. Certainly the second half of the season is going to be the best version of the Bengals offensive line that we have seen yet. But it is worth noting that they had their 2 lowest grades of the season recently against the Eagles and the Browns, even though the Raiders one directly last week was a little bit better. So we'll see. To me, that's a big time plus factor with Amarius Mims being on that offensive line and just the offensive line in general. Because if they're going to give Burrow time, again, he is playing so confidently right now, no matter what receivers are out there. And I think that is going to make for a fun performance. We have once again a 9:30 a.m. game, to the chagrin of Carmen, who is on the West Coast and now has to wake up at 6 a.m. to watch Giants Panthers in Germany. I feel like I feel like you'll at least miss the pregame for this one if you are going to get up for kickoff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I set my alarm for like right before kick, and like the first thing I hear is then Rich Eisen's voice, and I'm just like, all right, let's do it.
That's it. That's the alarm. Actually, it's just the TV.
Rich Eisen's voice.
Oh wait, this is actually a good transition into a story of my childhood. So I had a TV in my room when did I get the TV? Like middle school, I think. I don't know.
Wow, you were one of the lucky ones.
I was gonna say, I think that's a flex. That was like an unintentional flex, but it was an old ass TV, and there was a function on the television that was an alarm where it would come on at a certain time. And so in order to wake up for school, like pumped up, Pokemon came on at 6:30 a.m. every weekday. And I set the channel and I set 6:30 and I cranked the volume all the way up. So at 6:30 a.m., my TV went on and blasted the Pokemon theme song. And that's how I woke up, 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade. Well, actually,
honestly, this makes so much sense, Trev.
Yeah,
it puts everything,
For whatever reason, that just unlocked a childhood memory for me. So shout out Pokemon, helping me get up and get ready.
All right, well, Rich Eisen is my Pokemon this time.
All right, so matchup that matters. What do you have here?
Well, when you talk about these teams, there's not as many strengths really that you can pull from, but one of the strengths that you can pull from with the New York Giants is that defensive line, sexy Dexy and all. And it's against this Panthers offensive line. I think this comes against the trenches kind of to figure out who's going to get the better of each other. Because at this point, Giants defensive line, top 10 in pass rushing grade, 72.7 PFF grade. But the Panthers O-line, top 10 in pass blocking grade. They're ranked 8th with 75.7. So, I think they got the Panthers offensive line got a really bad rap over the last couple of years, and rightfully so. They weren't really a good unit, but they've really shed that, and they are a good unit now. And now we know that they're going to be blocking for Bryce Young yet again in Germany. So it's really going to matter about how they can protect him. And against a really formidable Giants defensive line, which for whatever the Giants are going through as a team, this is still a unit to be feared. And that's, I think, just going to tip the scales and see what these Carolina Panthers can do. Because if this Giants defensive line does overwhelm their offense, the Panthers offensive line, I mean, there's really not much that we can talk about with the Carolina Panthers then, and this is something the Giants will roll away with.
Yeah, obviously, I think that's a major matchup in this game. There's no doubt about it. I'm really looking forward to this one though, because although the Saints are certainly reeling, to the point where they fired Dennis Allen, since week 2, they haven't won a football game, and they lose to Carolina, and so it's not like it's the toughest team out there. But we kind of look at Carolina as the worst team in the NFL, and last week they were still able to come in and say, all right, well, we might be one of the bottom teams in the league this year, but that doesn't mean we're going to lose every game no matter what. And I like the fight that this team had, and specifically I like the confidence that I saw from Bryce Young. I went back and I watched the Saints game from this past week, and then I also watched the first Saints game that they played in week 1. Bryce Young, the starter in both of those games. Bryce just was off. I mean, he was just not confident. He was not trusting things, specifically against tight coverage. He really didn't give his guys a legitimate chance to come down with the football against tight coverage. Now, when it came to zone, he was able to anticipate decently well, feed the ball in between, the linebackers and the corners and the safeties and things like that. When guys were running open, he was able to do that. But it was when the Saints were playing man coverage, especially cross-field stuff, horizontal stuff. Bryce just, he was not comfortable giving his guys a realistic chance to get the football, because that also means, especially in the NFL, when you do that, you are giving the defense a chance to get their hands on the ball. And he just wasn't willing to do that. Against New Orleans this time around, he was. Now, specifically, you could see that in his passing grade against single coverage. 86.1 passing grade against single coverage this past week against the Saints, which was the second highest single game, single coverage passing grade of his career. So that's basically, layman's term, it was one of his best games that we have seen from Bryce Young in terms of the confidence to attack single coverage. Now, the Giants, 37.1 single coverage grade as a team this season. That is 32nd in the NFL. Deonte Banks specifically, 25.6 single coverage grade in the NFL, which is worst among full-time starting corners. So this is another ripe matchup for Bryce to be confident and trust his receivers. I know he doesn't have Deontay Johnson anymore. Now he doesn't have Jonathan Mingo anymore, but still, the Giants are not good at single coverage situations, and unfortunately for them, you can't just play zone all the time. You do have to mix in some man and some single coverage stuff. So when they do, does Bryce have that same sort of confidence to attack it this week the way that he did last week? This is an opponent where he should be able to do that, and I would love to see a repeat good performance to sort of stack things up for Bryce Young here. So that, to me, is my matchup that matters. What's your plus factor here in this game?
Yeah, rolling actually right off of that, if you go to the other side of things, somebody else that's really good in single coverage is Malik Neighbors. And he has 319 yards for single coverage this year, which ranks 9th. His teammate Darius Slayton actually ranks 7th with 351 yards against single coverage. And Daniel Jones has an 86.2 PFF grade targeting single coverage, which is 6th in the league. So if there's something that Daniel Jones does well, it is when teams play him in single coverage. And to your point, you can't just sit back in zone all the time. You're going to need to man up these guys. You're going to need to press these guys a little bit. And what happens, though, is that the Giants are actually pretty good at it. And if they can get going in single coverage and take advantage of those situations when the Panthers do play them that way, that's going to make a lot of difference for this Giants offense.
My plus factor is rookie Jalen Coker. And I think when you look at the Panthers now, no Jonathan Mingo, no Deontay Johnson, like I mentioned, who are they going to throw the ball to? Well, they're going to throw it a little bit to Jatavian Sanders, their rookie tight end, but they're also going to throw it to their undrafted rookie wide receiver, Jalen Coker, who actually has the highest receiving grade on the team. He has a 79.5 receiving grade, and that includes Deontay Johnson and Jonathan Mingo when they were on the squad. He also has a 109.5 quarterback rating when targeted, which is by far the highest on the team. So this is somebody, if you don't know a lot about Jalen Coker, which I understand, he was an undrafted free agent, Holy Cross wide receiver, big time record breaker. I think he has the record for most receiving touchdowns, most receiving yards. Not sure if he has receptions, but it makes sense if he had receptions as well. He's just somebody who really was able to produce at an extremely high level throughout his college career, and making the Panthers roster, it was sort of a signal to them to say, hey, this guy brings us a high floor. This is not your regular undrafted wide receiver. This is somebody who we might be able to count on even in a rookie season. And now we're certainly seeing that from him. So I expect the threat percentage, the wide receiver usage, the yards per route run for your fantasy football person out there to be a lot higher for Jalen Coker as the season goes on. So that is my plus factor here in this game. Transitioning to the 1 p.m. games, we're going to start with the Patriots and the Bears here. There's the Bears, it feels like it's been a very big roller coaster for them even to get to this point. Now, even on the season at 4-4, you and I talked about what a tough schedule this is for the Bears moving forward. You would have liked to be a game or two above 500 going into the gauntlet of their schedule here over the next 9 weeks. But this one specifically is once again a little bit easier for them. And so it feels like they got to take care of business a little bit here. But what's the matchup that matters for you, Carmen?
Yeah, this is the end sort of this sweet spot of the Bears schedule where you need to get at least a game above 500 if you want to survive now starting division play against the toughest division in football right now. And the Patriots I feel like the Patriots have been like, sorry, Patriots fans, but you've been kind of like the get right game for so many teams this year. And that's no truer than the Chicago Bears. And so my matchup that matters, honestly, though, is Chicago against itself. This is a team that it's starting to snowball what happened in Washington, and then you go into Arizona and it just nothing works. They've regressed offensively following their bye week, which isn't good news. It looks like they're starting back from square one. Caleb's holding the ball too long. He's trying for that deep shot because these guys are getting down really quickly. The Bears have not scored a touchdown on their opening drive this season yet. And I believe they're the only team in the league to not have done so. So they are getting down very quickly. And it's a matter of playing catch up, which then inevitably makes this offense a little bit more one-dimensional. And they're struggling to get the ball to DeAndre Swift in space, which is something they were doing so well by the bye week. At least we're seeing Caleb and Rome Odunze kind of being on the same page, those two rookies. That's really good news for the future of the Bears. But there needs to be some more rhythm and better play calling and all of that in Chicago. And Matt Eberflus cannot lose this team. And I feel like if the Bears don't go out and win at home where they've won their last 3 games, that's going to fracture the locker room irreparably. We already hear guys coming out talking about, questioning coaching decisions publicly and saying that, they're told to keep this stuff in house, but they don't really care. They said what they said. That's literally a direct quote from DJ Moore. It's just all bad. The vibes are not good right now in Chicago. And I have to kind of remind people, Bears fans in particular, this was always going to be a roller coaster with a new play caller, with a rookie. It's just not a place that has historically been able to develop quarterbacks. This was always going to kind of be an up and down thing. And at the end of the day, sitting at 500 is much better than you were last year at this time. And you are about to enter a gauntlet, but you have an opportunity here to still get to a winning season. And that is, I think, what should have always been the expectation for the Chicago Bears this year.
Yeah,
I mean, look, I preach too.
Yeah, no, look, I do agree with you. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but if they can, at this point in time, them sitting at 4-4, if they end the season above 500, even if it's 9-8, I mean, that's a massive win for them, given the schedule that they're about to go through. They have not played a single team in their division, and it's the most stacked division in the NFL this year. So that would be an incredible accomplishment. The worry, I think, from Bears fans is, okay, it was always going to not look pretty. I think we knew that, but is it at least are we at least showing some progress here? And this game is paramount for Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, because right now, when it comes to first quarter scoring, you talked about the Bears, they're not really getting these games started off on the right foot. First quarter for the Bears offense this season, they are 28th in offensive grade, and they are 26th in EPA per play. The Patriots defense in the first quarter, on the other side of things, they're 20th in defensive grade and they're 22nd in EPA per play. So it better look good against the Patriots. They're not dead last in the NFL, but it better look good. It's got to look better. And that's the thing that is the matchup that matters to me. This game, I think in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter for the Patriots. I mean, the Patriots at this point, they're 2-7. They're tied for the number 1 overall pick right now because of strength of schedule. They do have the number 1 overall pick. This win wouldn't mean a ton in the grand scheme of things outside of them bringing themselves down in the draft order in the opposite direction that what you would want. Actually, for the Bears, it's not that big of a difference maker given the fact that this is still an inferior opponent that they should be better than. But I think that's the thing. That's to me what the big takeaway of this game is. The Bears should win this game. And in fact, the Bears should be able to come out of the gate midway through the season now. This isn't week 1. This isn't week 2. You're midway through the season. You've got to be able to come out and actually orchestrate the offense the way that you want intentionally. And if you can't, whoa, that seat for Shane Waldron is going to start to get scorching hot. And obviously, I think it's already hot for their head coach, Matt Eberflus, as well, because if there's going to be any change in Chicago, it's not going to be with Caleb Williams. He just drafted him. It's going to be with those other guys. I'll roll that right into my plus factor, because my plus factor in this game is DJ Moore. And it's as much because of what you referenced, vibes, than it is anything else. One, they need him to be a big part of this passing plan, but he is in for a career low in yards right now. He's on pace for a career low in yards. 19.5% threat percentage would be the lowest that he has had in his career since his rookie season. So he's certainly not used to this. And then, of course, we all saw the play that was circulating around social media where dude just steps out and walks straight to the bench. Now, Matt Eberflus came out and he's like, no. DJ just hurt his ankle. He rolled his ankle. He's fine. I went back and I watched the play. Okay. One, it's the first quarter. Okay. So anybody saying like, he was tired, he was just tired, he was going to bed. It's the first quarter and it's 2nd and 6, by the way. So those things, you can take out those excuses right there. He walks off the field while the play is still going on and walks to the bench. He sits down on the bench. And if you watch from the expanded all 22 angle from the sideline, nobody runs up to him. There's no like trainer or assistant coach or something that like runs up to him. He literally just walks to the bench, sits down on the bench, and puts his arms up like this. His ankle was hurt.
It was something, though, that they said that it wasn't just the ankle because he did pull up on it. It was that he stepped out accidentally. And so he wanted to take himself out of the play to avoid a penalty, which, okay, guys do that, especially in the end zone. Like when you need to gotta have it play and you don't want to tempt the quarterback to even throw it to you. So I get that part of it, but the part that still got me, and when you're talking about vibes, why aren't you sticking around to see what happens in that play? Why are you going straight to the bench and sitting down? Why are like the body language from DJ Moore this season, coming off of just getting paid, by the way, the richest contract in Bears history? I like that to me signals way more of a problem than him trying to take himself out of the play because he already stepped out and he knew that he couldn't be the first one to touch the ball. I get that whole point, but I think any other guy that's kind of bought in or is being a team player there turns right around, stays on the sideline, and goes to see, like, Caleb Williams was scrambling for his life at that point. And the reason that you have Caleb Williams is because he can improvise like that. So don't you want to stick around and see what happens? I did, like, that to me was the red flag with that play, not necessarily that he took himself out, if we're taking Matt Eberflus at his word.
So that's my plus factor. Your plus factor here before we move on to the next one.
It's this Bears rushing defense, because that really seemed to be the difference. And we haven't talked at all about the Bears defense because they've done their job all season, and they did their job in that Washington game. They were the only reason that the Bears were even still in it, and the reason that Caleb Williams was able to pull the Bears to a lead with 25 seconds left and put the Washington Commanders in that spot. But the Bears defense faltered in this game against Arizona. James Conner, over 100 rushing yards on the day. And then you have DeMercado at the end of the first half on a play where they were just trying to get a little bit closer so they could kick a field goal, ends up scoring a touchdown because Matt Eberflus calls a pass defense rather than a rushing defense or whatever, and you get gashed in that way. That's very demoralizing. I mean, I think DeMercado ended up with like 59 yards rushing, 53 of which came on that play alone. So you need to shore up this defense. This defense needs to look a little bit more bought in. That's going to be even tougher, though, with the news that Andrew Billings, that defensive interior, tore his pec, and he's going to be out for a significant amount of time. According to Matt Eberflus, he wouldn't commit to it being the rest of the season, but it's not good. And that is not going to help this Bears rushing defense in particular. And that's something that the Patriots can do well with Ramondre Stevenson. And so, like, I feel like if you are going to limit the Patriots and if you are going to go out and score points, that's great. But you need your defense to do what it's done, as unfair as that is, because they've risen to the occasion most games, save for this last one. But this can't snowball from Chicago.
Bills Colts, next game that I want to hit here. This one's in Indianapolis. Obviously, we had the roller coaster of Anthony Richardson getting benched before last game, and we sort of talked about that last week. Now it is still Joe Flacco here, and I honestly think that the matchup that matters to me is the Colts just have to get their run game right. That, to me, is so paramount with this, because is Joe Flacco going to light the world on fire for you? No. But I do think that he could be a game manager type of quarterback for you. Sure. I do think that veteran savviness and wisdom, if you will, not that it's going to be perfect, I'm not saying that, but he can be more predictable is the wrong word. on schedule, efficient. Like, it doesn't have to be as boom or bust like it was with Anthony Richardson. It felt like either Richardson was hitting a big time throw 40 yards down the field or it was an incomplete pass. For Flacco, it could be a little bit more layered than that. You can hit stuff short, you can hit it intermediate, over the middle, you can hit those deep shots, but it'll probably not probably, it will be less than what they saw with Richardson. The thing that's got to be better is just running the football. And when you look at last game, 13 carries for 47 yards for Jonathan Taylor. And since with Flacco being in and out of the lineup, we have some different numbers here. Colts run game with Flacco starting weeks 4, 5, 6, and 9. In weeks 4, 6, and 9, they had a negative EPA per rush. In week 5, it was positive, but it was their 4th best one of the season. So there's just no doubt about it. I mean, when you look at Jonathan Taylor's rushing grade as well, 51.9 with Flacco as the starter, 73.4 with Anthony Richardson as the starter. It is different when the defense has to account for what Richardson can do, not just as a runner, but also taking the top off of the defense. That deep ball threat was a legitimate threat every single place. For as much as you want to sit here and you say, oh, the completion percentage was really low, I understand that. I'm not trying to write that off. But defenses had to account for it basically every play because this dude's got a superhuman arm. So when you have the ability to push the ball deep down the field consistently, what's going to lighten the boxes? These defenses, they got to play a little bit deeper. They can't play press. They've got to play 2 safeties. They've got to have contingency plans, whether you're going deep to the left or the right. They've got to be on their P's and Q's there, and that just means that there are less defenders in the box. When they're a lighter box, guess what? Especially with the Colts offensive line, you're going to run the ball a lot better with a guy like Jonathan Taylor. You've got to figure out how to get him going when Flacco is now the quarterback. How can we lighten the box? How can we make things easier to run the football the way that we need to? To me, that's the matchup that matters here, because if the Colts don't have that, they're not going to have enough firepower to beat the Bills, and they're not going to have enough firepower, in my opinion, to beat a lot of teams down the stretch if Flacco is going to be the guy. So that's where they've got to really get right. The Bills, they're not really a great team to have a get-right game. They're 6th in the NFL when it comes to limiting EPA per rush, so they're pretty dang good at it. They're just a very sound defensive group. They're comfortable playing in those 2 high situations. Maybe they'll rotate it a little bit down to be more aggressive when defending the run, but it feels like they don't have to, given the numbers that I just named there. So that, to me, is a big-time matchup that matters. If the Colts are going to be competitive in this one, which is a 4-point spread in favor of the Buffalo Bills, even though it is in Indianapolis, it's going to come through them being a lot better running the football with a more, I would say, traditional offense than the boomer bust one that was with Anthony Richardson. What about you? What do you got?
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out between the 2 quarterbacks, just given the fact that you look at this offensive line in Indianapolis, and this is one of the best offensive lines in football, if not the best. And they have the top run blocking grade at 81.7 in the league. So it's not because of the offensive line that this run game hasn't gotten going, but it's more of what you said, is that teams aren't respecting Joe Flacco in the deep ball. So yes, you can afford to load the boxes a little bit more. But then that also comes down to, can we pass block for Joe Flacco to give him time to try and push the ball down the field to then open up that run game in the way that it is again when Anthony Richardson is in the game. And that's something that the Colts offensive line is really good at too. Can this Bills defensive line then overwhelm them to kind of disrupt all of that and leave this Colts offense where we've seen it under Joe Flacco? And listen, the Bills have, Gregory Rousseau has 37 pressures on that Bills defensive line. That's tied for the 7th most in the NFL. This is a formidable pass rush. Even with kind of all of the changes that they've undergone this season, that's something that is going to matter, I think, a great deal. So just my overall matchup that matters is how this Colts O-line fares against the D-line. And specifically in the pass blocking aspect of everything, which the Colts offensive line currently ranks 2nd with an 82.2 PFF grade there. It just needs to then translate to Joe Flacco trying to push the ball down the field, making this defense respect that and opening that up so that they're kind of on their heels a little bit more.
I'll go back to you for plus factor. You can kick it off with plus factor. Who you got there?
I actually have this with the Colts corners, but specifically when it comes to getting interceptions.
Yes,
because the Bills have been quote unquote lucky as far as interceptions go. They only have 2 INTs. Josh Allen has 2 INTs this season, which is tied for the 3rd fewest, but he's had 12 turnover-worthy plays, which is tied for the 5th most. So that's a huge discrepancy there that's just kind of waiting for another team to capitalize on, where can you turn these turnover-worthy plays that Josh Allen is inevitably going to throw into something productive for your own team? And that's going to be up to, Kenny Moore, Samuel Womack, Jalen Jones. Kenny Moore has the fourth highest graded PFF grade among corners, 80.5. So he is a very kind of guy that I would look towards to be the one to maybe turn this luck in favor of Indianapolis in this game at least. I think that's going to be something that you're going to have to do if you have a prayer against the Buffalo Bills right now.
Yeah, the Colts, 7 interceptions as a team this season, 3 dropped interceptions as well, which I think both are top 10 in the league. And so they have the ability to do it. I agree with you completely. My plus factor in this one was, in fact, Josh Allen, because if he plays this same style, you figure the ball's not going to bounce their way as much as it has when it comes to the difference of turnover-worthy plays to actual turnovers that we have seen in the game. So if things regress a little bit towards getting closer to what the true turnover-worthy plays represent, well, all of a sudden you win the turnover battle and you're in Indianapolis. You're at home. Certainly, if you could run the ball a little bit better, now we're talking about a tight contest there. Walt in the chat also wants me to shout out Ray Davis, who is an X factor for the Buffalo Bills. I agree. Just run game overall, I think, is a big deal for the Buffalo Bills, because now they got a lot of guys that are very comfortable having the ball in their hands, whether it's Ray Davis, whether it's Ty Johnson, whether it's James Cook, or even Josh Allen himself. They're a very, very balanced football team right now, and that's why the Buffalo Bills have one of the best records at 7-2. Vikings Jags, next game that I want to get to here. Vikings certainly looking to take care of business against what feels like an inferior opponent record-wise than the Jags, but the Jags have still been in some really close games. And I mean, I hated the play call that they had at the end of last game against the Philadelphia Eagles, where there's a minute left. It's 1st and 10. They're 13 yards away from the end zone. They're only down 5. I mean, they got a chance to win this thing in Philadelphia, and they end up, it's a play call that I didn't love, with a wheel route to a running back that you have yet to give a target to that game in Dearness Johnson. And I didn't love Trevor Lawrence's decision either to go straight to it and actually throw that football the way that the coverage was playing out. So I think it was just bad all around, but the Jags still feel like a team that is better than their record. The Vikings, they can't take them lightly. What do you think about this one, Carmen? Where is your matchup that matters here?
Yeah, I'm going towards the Vikings O-line against Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, this Jacksonville pass rush and defensive front in general, because you did have a shakeup on this Vikings offensive line, which has been a strength of this offense, specifically the tackles. It was the tandem of Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill that were kind of masking some inefficiencies on the interior of that offensive line. And there's just no replacing a guy like Christian Darrisaw when you're talking about, I believe, as a top 3 left tackle in this league. But then you have Cam Robinson. He gets there midweek, sits out the first day of practice, joins, gets a couple days of work, and then is basically told by Kevin O'Connell and the offense just, hey, block the guy in front of you. And you know what? He did it seamlessly. And this Vikings offensive line this last game against the Colts held up beautifully. The left side held up beautifully. They did some extra things too to kind of help Cam Robinson out and help in that protection. He got a game ball afterwards, Cam Robinson. I think that this was the single biggest impact when it comes to the trades that we saw, given the fact that without Christian Darrisaw, I think a lot of us just started to write off the Vikings, and rightfully so. He was so integral to what this offense was doing, to how Sam Darnold felt in the pocket and how he was able to, operate this offense. And no matter how good of a coach that Kevin O'Connell is, if you don't have time to throw the ball and you can't get it to Justin Jefferson and now TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison and all those guys, life is going to be really hard. And so now Cam Robinson comes in. Can Jacksonville still, kind of exploit that left side? Maybe the Vikings ease up a little bit on trying to help Cam now that he's been there a little bit longer. And now we get to see how well he actually is going to do in tandem with the rest of his offensive line. Josh Hines-Allen, 37 pressures. He's top 10 in the NFL with that. Trayvon Walker, 31 pressures, tied for 20th. This is something that they're going to have to contend with, and Jacksonville absolutely has the opportunity to overwhelm either side of this line with both of those guys.
Yeah, I think that's certainly worth pointing out. Now, I'll say on the other side of things, that could also be a game wrecker. Not that I want to just go like, oh, trenches, no matter what, but obviously it is important. Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting style matchup with what's happening on the other side of the ball, and that is the Jags offensive line. Now, it's a little bit tough with Cam Robinson no longer there, right? Because a lot of the data that we have from the Jags offensive line includes with Cam Robinson at left tackle, which is funny. Now, obviously, he's on the other side.
Gets to go against his former
right. And so he's probably telling the inside secrets, about what these guys are doing in practice and what they're capable of. But
probably still has the playbook.
At least he's got it up here. He might not have it physically, but he knows it. He knows it between the ears. When you look at the Jags offensive line, they're going to be preparing to go up against a defensive line that can throw everything at you, especially with Dallas Turner playing a little bit more and being a little bit more successful. You got Jonathan Grenard, who has one of the highest total pressure counts in the NFL so far this season. And I think just as a group, we know that Brian Flores is always looking to cook up pressure in any possible way that he can. When you look at the Jags offensive line this year, 17 pressures versus the blitz this season. That's 4th in the NFL, but they're 8th in pressure percentage allowed. Now, they're 4th in the fewest amount of pressures that they have given up versus the blitz, but they're also a bottom 10 team in how many total blitzes they have seen. So they just have not played a lot of teams that are blitzing them. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if that's like teams don't think they have to blitz to get pressure against the Jags, or if it's a style thing. Hey, this team doesn't really blitz as much as they normally do, or as other teams that you're going to find. We know that the Vikings are going to do it. And so the stat that I continue to gravitate towards is that even though they're few in total pressure numbers, the Jags versus the blitz, they are 8th in pressure percentage. So I think that this is an area where the Vikings and just who they are stylistically can have an advantage against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that's where I get really nervous about this offensive line in this specific matchup of how they are matching up against this defense, which really likes to throw a lot of different things at you. So to me, that's a major matchup that matters here. And on the offensive side of things, still with Jacksonville, my plus factor is Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne kind of comes back from injury. Now I get it's a hamstring injury. You don't want to rush guys back from a hamstring injury. But we've said before on this show, whether it's been you saying this or me saying this, I think that we've, gone around and both said this at some point in time. The Jags, for as much as they want to be a team that pushes the ball deep down the field, if they don't run the ball, they don't win. Like that's just that's been their script basically since going back to last year. Sure, they want to be an aired out team, but it only works if they can really run the ball efficiently, I should say. It doesn't have to be a high volume, but efficiently. Last week, Travis Etienne only played 31% of the offensive snaps compared to over 50% that Tank Bigsby got. And Travis Etienne really barely played down the stretch, second half of the third quarter and in the fourth quarter. So he's their most talented back. He gives them the most explosive ability. He gives them the highest missed tackles force percentage and possibility. He could be a guy that gets you yards after catch. I know, or yards after contact, I should say. Certainly yards after catch as well. He has that in his wheelhouse too. To me, if you don't get him going, I think they're going to be missing a big chunk of this offense, especially with the injuries that they have dealt with on the receiving side of things too. So Jags offensive line, big time matchup that matters and how they deal with the pressure of the Vikings. But then also the big X factor has to be Travis Etienne getting more involved than what we saw last week.
Yeah, I like that call out, especially because it takes a tremendous amount of football IQ when you are playing this Vikings defense, and because of the fact that not only are they going to blitz you, but they're going to do it in a lot of creative ways. So that's up to the offensive line to identify. That's up to Trevor Lawrence on identifying it. And then if you can add a run game kind of dimension to that, that's going to slow things down, and that's really going to round things out and give you a shot at least mitigating so that the Minnesota Vikings don't get to sell out on the pass rush every single time. But my plus factor here is actually, if you go on the other side of things with the Minnesota Vikings, it's Sam Darnold, but specifically Sam Darnold off of play action, because of all of the success we've seen so far this season of Sam Darnold when exercising play action. So he's 51 of 69. He's got 713 yards, 9 passing touchdowns, which is the most of any quarterback off of play action. And then when you look at the other side of things, the Jags have allowed the most passing yards versus play action this season. So that is just a really good way to exploit this Jaguars defense, and it's something that the Minnesota Vikings and Sam Darnold specifically do very well. So I really do think that that's going to kind of dictate exactly how well Sam Darnold does do, especially when you're talking about maybe there's question marks now along the offensive line, and you are going to have a couple of guys coming after you in Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines Allen. Can you kind of, again, the play action is a way to kind of mitigate that rush to make teams kind of respect and keep them guessing against if they're going to run the ball or not. And they do have Aaron Jones in Minnesota that is so effective at running the football and has been a light, just vibes wise, for the Minnesota Viking as he is at whatever team he's on. That's how he was in Green Bay too. But I really do think that Sam Darnold off of play action you're going to see a lot of that against the Jags, given the fact that that is a deficiency in their defense.
Let's move on to Broncos Chiefs. Broncos taking on Kansas City. They're coming off a thrilling overtime win on Monday Night Football against the Buccaneers. Broncos, tough loss against the Baltimore Ravens that, wasn't close on the scoreboard, although I continue to argue with people that I think this game was actually closer than the score indicated. It was 3 possessions at the beginning of the game for me with the Denver Broncos where, all right, you got a tip pass interception on the first possession of the game. Not ideal, obviously, on the road facing a team like the Ravens. So they're sort of down in that respect, momentum-wise. It's a turnover on downs in the right area of the field where you would want to go for it on 4th down. They just didn't get it. And then it was another turnover on downs after that. So 3 of their first 3 possessions for Denver, an interception, a tipped interception, a turnover on downs with the right decision, and another turnover on downs with the right decision. At that point in time, you're just too far behind the 8 ball. They weren't totally out of it on the scoreboard at that point in time, but you knew that the Ravens' avalanche of points was going to come. So you needed more out of those first 3 possessions, and Denver, you just was not in a place to keep up after that. So I'm not saying that I think the Broncos should have won that game, but I think that it should have been a lot closer than the final score indicated with Denver. Now they're taking on a Kansas City Chiefs team that remains undefeated this year. What is your matchup that matters here, Carmen?
No, I was with you too ahead of that game. I said that I did ultimately think the Ravens were going to win, but I did think it was going to be close. And I do think that it would have been had it not gotten off to such a rocky start for the Broncos. So don't do that, Broncos.
Good start. Good start.
Don't beat yourself. But what I'm really looking at is just how much DeAndre Hopkins has now mattered to this Kansas City Chiefs offense and how much Patrick Mahomes already trusts him in his Chiefs debut. He's throwing him balls into a double and triple coverage, and DeAndre Hopkins is rewarding that chance and coming down with these contested catches, which he is a receiver that Patrick Mahomes really hasn't had yet in his career, where the guy that he can just throw it up to and in a prayer, and DeAndre Hopkins is going to come down with that. So how does DeAndre Hopkins fare against these Broncos corners? I think is going to be a tremendous matchup that matters here. I mean, 8 catches on 9 targets for 86 yards for DeAndre Hopkins in his first game, 2 receiving touchdowns, 5 catches gaining a first down. I mean, he is now already so integral to this Chiefs offense. Can the Broncos corners slow him down? Got Pat Surtain, 76.3 coverage grade, PFF, and then his rank is the 9th, so he's top 10. Then you have Riley Moss on the other side, 43rd in PFF grade, 86.4, which is, again, among corners, which is good. He's doing very, very well opposite Pat Surtain, considering that he is getting picked on a little bit more because you don't necessarily want to throw it to Pat Surtain's way if you can help that. But is Pat Surtain going to be the one to be on DeAndre Hopkins? Can he win with his length on a guy that is so good at contested catches? That to me is going to be not only the match that matters, but the one that is just going to be fun to watch.
I'm looking at Bo Nix in this game as we kind of have to, certainly as a big time difference maker, and he's going up against really tough defense in the Kansas City Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo. But when you look at Bo Nix and who he has been as a rusher among QBs, he's 5th in total carries. He's 5th in total rushing yards. He's 3rd in total rushes gaining a first down. He's 3rd in rushing touchdowns, and he has 31 scrambles, which is the 2nd most. The Chiefs have allowed the 2nd fewest rushing yards to quarterbacks, or I think just overall, actually, now that I'm looking at it, so far this season. So this is a stingy group. I mean, they're a group that is really sound when it comes to how they defend the run, and I think a lot of that is, of course, towards running backs, but it could also be mobile quarterbacks too. And so I think that what Nix has been as an on-the-run type of a quarterback is something that he did well at Oregon that I don't think that he got enough credit for when he was coming into the league. And now we're seeing that be a major weapon here for this offense. It's a big reason why They're able to continue to move the sticks really well. I think it's a reason why they are surprising a lot of teams with the record that they have. Obviously, sitting here at 5-4, I don't think that they're necessarily going to, take down the Chiefs as the champs at the top of this division, but Broncos sitting at 5-4, 9 weeks into the season. I don't think many would have predicted that. And I think Nick's is a big reason why. So I also think that throwing on the run is going to be a big deal, because it's one thing where the quarterback becomes a rushing factor for your offense. But if the defense knows that you're not really going to be much of a threat to throw the ball, even when you are out of the pocket, they can really sell out with those QB spies to just the second you start to move out of the pocket, boom, there is no hesitation. I'm going straight at you. I'm not thinking about coverage players. So does Sean Payton, I shouldn't be asking this question. I was going to say, does Sean Payton know how to take advantage of that? He does know how to take advantage of that. Can they implement that kind of stuff where they go, okay, hey, here's what we're going to do. We know you're a great threat with your legs. We know you can pick up first downs to pick up some extra yards. We're going to have you roll out a good amount in this game. And if the Chiefs don't come at you, take those yards right in front of you. If they do, we're going to design it to have a route that's consistently going over the middle behind wherever that linebacker is. I'm very curious to see the chess match between Sean Payton and Steve Spagnuolo in that area specifically when Nix becomes a runner. What do they do against one another? Are they selling out to go get him into the backfield? Are they sticking back in coverage because they don't want him to hit a pass over top? Because all those games and all that experience, I know we kind of made fun of Bo Nix a little bit for it, right? Like, get a real job, get out of college. How you still doing this, right? But all of those games, most games started in college football history. That comes with a high football IQ and a lot of things where you've seen a lot of stuff. So that's, I think, why we have got some good implementation of Sean Payton's offense already. And that's an area that I'm really looking forward to seeing how these two great coaches, offensive and defensive side of the ball, go after one another. Plus factor for you, Carmen. What do you got?
Yeah. We know that obviously the Chiefs have played in almost all one-score games, but there's also no one that you trust more going into the fourth quarter or overtime than Patrick Mahomes. And that's validated by the fact that he has an 89.5 PFF grade in the fourth quarter and overtime, which ranks first. 14 completions, gaining a first down on third and fourth down in those scenarios also, which ranks third. We saw it against the Buccaneers, and going into overtime is probably not a good idea against Patrick Mahomes. But this is a silver lining for the Denver Broncos and that defense in particular, because if this game is close, if you can keep it close towards the end of the game, that actually bodes well for the Denver Broncos, who are second in EPA per play against. So that they stand up in the fourth quarter and in overtime, according to the metrics that we have, as far as EPA especially, you can kind of limit things for the Kansas City Chiefs. And in a division game against a familiar opponent, stranger things have happened. That's all I'm saying. And if we do believe in this Broncos team under Sean Payton, which they've given us reason to, especially defensively. Mm-hmm. If you can keep this game close, you could maybe pull it out, Denver. And that's something that would be very, you pulled off an upset last year too over the Chiefs. I think that can happen this time around too, given what your defense does well and how well that they can come in clutch.
Well, I think if they're going to do it, I think Troy Franklin's got to step up. I've talked about Troy Franklin, I feel like, so many times in this preview show because I'm waiting for him to really step up. He was Bo Nix's go-to guy in that Oregon offense, and it feels like he's trying to get there with them. Certainly, I think it was, 3-4 weeks ago, there was a stretch of 3 games where the threat percentage was above 20. They were really trying to get involved in the offense, but the last 2 weeks, now it's below 20%. So they're not really getting him as involved. The targets are still there. The catches are down, though. It's just they don't have that chemistry, and they need it because Troy Franklin is one of their deep receivers. And if you're going to beat the Chiefs, you got to have a couple of those plays. It can't just all be Courtland Sutton. So to me, the plus factor, I've said it a couple of times. People are probably sick of hearing me say it, but it has to be Troy Franklin because they have to hit a couple of those big shots if you're going to go into Kansas City and win this game. So Troy Franklin, to me, has got to be the plus factor here. The rest of the stuff has got to work out well. The offensive line's got to still block really well, which they have been over the last couple of weeks. Javonte Williams has got to still be able to play well on the ground. But ultimately, it's kind of like a turnover. I'm viewing it like that. You've got to be able to hit a couple of these deep shots here, even outside of Courtland Sutton. And I think Troy Franklin's the guy that needs to do it here. But what about you?
Yeah. that was.
Oh, you
Yeah, I was
said
gonna say I already.
you said the Patrick Mahomes one.
But yeah, Patrick, it's okay. I was like, my plus factor is just the Denver Broncos defense in
No,
the
you
fourth quarter
guys.
against Patrick Mahomes. But we can keep going.
Yeah, what's your plus factor?
My
Actually,
plus
that's what we're gonna
factor.
do.
Let's go beyond that.
Come with the extra credit here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Let's move on to Falcons
Let's move
and the
on.
Saints. This is now an interesting matchup because, well, it feels like the Saints are kind of giving up, right? I don't have a ton to say about this game
No, I don't
outside of
either.
it's simply the Saints versus themselves. They're just not a good football team. They lose the Carolina Panthers last week. They fire their head coach. It's an interim head coach. You know, you got the players getting on social media, like just airing out their emotions. It's not a good spot.
Former
Marshawn
players
Lattimore.
going after the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, like Marshawn Lattimore gets traded. You mentioned you've got former players, Mike Thomas, going after Derek Carr for putting Olave in harm's way, and Olave goes through another concussion. They're already down Rashid Shaheed. Like, what are we necessarily supposed to think about this Saints team at this point, outside of those week 2 wins that they had earlier in this, those 2 week that 2-0 stretch that they had in weeks 1 and weeks 2 of the season? The Saints are 28th in offensive EPA per play, and they are 28th in defensive EPA per play. This is, simply put, one of the worst teams in the NFL. And before the season, I said that the Saints were going to be a sneaky team to get a top 5 draft pick this year, and they are still on that train. Now, I thought that I was going to be dead wrong 2 weeks into the season, but here we are. Losing Eric McCoy at center really hurt. They've been playing musical chairs along the interior offensive line since. Talize Fuanga was in and out of the lineup. You lose Ryan Ramczyk, and that sucks. The secondary's been banged up. Now you got Paulson Adebo, who is out for the season. Marshawn Lattimore just got traded. Tyrann Mathieu doesn't look the same. Cam Jordan doesn't look the same. You got Demario Davis, but he certainly can't do it all himself. And what's on the offensive side of things? You didn't have Derek Carr for a couple of weeks, but now you get Derek Carr back. Carmen, I don't know what to do here because we have talked about, and I think you've brought this up a couple of times, Alvin Kamara is the X factor of this team, right? When all these things are going wrong, if Alvin Kamara can give you something here, you got a chance. Carmen, Kamara had over 200 all-purpose yards last week, and they lost to the Panthers.
And they lost badly. Yeah.
I don't. This is on the other side of things. It's the Falcons team that's playing incredibly well, and I don't really see a world outside of just it's the NFL,
right,
that the Falcons lose this game to the Saints this week.
Yeah, I mean, I have down, like, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that the Falcons are doing well, specifically Kirk Cousins on third down. He's got 9 touchdowns versus 1 interception, 39 completions, gaining the first down, tied for 5th. And, you know, New Orleans isn't particularly good on third down, but, like, you're so right in the fact that, like, what is kind of the point in going back and forth about, like, how these teams match up when, I mean, I think the matchup that matters is the Saints against themselves. I think the plus factor is maybe, you know, you see these teams that fire their head coach and they get a bump from that. And,
right.
Is there kind of that parity that this is the NFL type scenario where this team kind of huddles around itself and says, okay, we're playing for pride. We're all professionals here. We need to put it on the line and kind of band together and figure out a way to win. And to be fair, doing that against a division team is not out of the question because you are so incredibly familiar with each other. And this is such a good rivalry between the Falcons and the Saints. Like, anything can happen, but you're right. Alvin Kamara can't do it all himself. Demario Davis can't do it all himself. And that's pretty much what you have on either side of the ball for the New Orleans Saints right now. I just wish I had better news for Saints fans, but you're going against a Falcons team that is, quite frankly, rolling.
Yeah. Falcons are playing incredibly well. They've got the 5th highest EPA per play on offense since week 3 this season. The defense, okay, it's a little bit of a struggle, but it was always going to be. This offense is absolutely cooking, though, with Zach Robinson at offensive coordinator and Kirk Cousins at quarterback. The offensive line's playing well. The weapons are playing well. Specifically, Bijan Robinson is running like one of the best running backs in the league. It's so efficient. They do exactly what they want to do. My plus factor in this one, I think it's a great point that you made. The plus factor is basically like, how pissed off are the Saints, right?
How pissed off are you? Yeah.
How pissed off are you? That the level of pissed offness of the New Orleans Saints could be the X factor in this one because it's in New Orleans, right? And that still remains a tough place to play. And it's a divisional opponent. I threw out there the ultimate plus factor of all plus factors, and that is just Taysom Hill, right? Because he's played the most snaps yet this season over the last 2 weeks. You know, he got in there as a runner, he got in there as a receiver. Like he was involved in the offense last week. So I figure, hey, in a game that kind of it can't really make sense for the Saints to win this football game. Why not have Taysom Hill go out there and be the plus factor? But other than that, I just think the Falcons are playing so well. I don't want Falcons fans to watch this and think, well, you barely talked about our team. This should definitely be a game that you win. You know, Kirk, I don't think he's lighting the world on fire, but it's a very efficient offense right now. They understand their identity. They understand what they do well. They run the ball so well with that two-headed monster of Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. And even if they just execute that kind of a game plan, I think it's going to be enough given the injuries that the Saints are dealing with, the vibes that the Saints are dealing with. And again, it just comes down to how pissed off the Saints are going to be because the Falcons should roll in this game.
Yeah, and they will be. And again, playing in New Orleans, it's a very hostile environment. Even all the way up in the press box, it's cold. The food actually isn't great, which is weird because New Orleans is a great city. No one knows how to get anywhere between the field and up into the press box. It's deafeningly loud
Absolutely,
because the noise is reverberating off of the ceiling right into the press box, as is the AC.
I love that. I love that.
I would if I don't have so many scars from there.
I was going to say, you had a different job to do that I did actually working for the team. And so I think that you are certainly allowed to have the differing opinion here. But like, as a beat reporter, when I was there, I was
God, you couldn't hear yourself think.
Hell, I was in the building for the Ryan Fitzpatrick, like, what was it, 48-40 game? That was just the most insane performance. It was the bomb to Mike Evans. You're like, what is going on here? So I was there for that, and it was crazy vibes. So I do certainly remember that. You don't need breakfast there. You could just go to Cafe Du Monde, right? You know, like that's where,
not even lunch. Like it was just like it was such an afterthought.
Oh, you didn't. Okay, so you don't want to do it for breakfast. You went there for lunch. Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, like they didn't, and then they take away so like I also would survive on like hot tea. Because it was so cold. And I'm not one even to get cold like that because I'm from Chicago. Like I can deal with it. But they would pull the hot tea.
Come on.
Like in the third quarter. And I'm like, I had 2 more cups to keep me going here. Like I need this stuff just to stay warm. Why are you taking it away from me?
They only took it away from you guys because you worked for the Bucs, right?
I know, exactly.
No, I don't know if that's the
case. They packed it up in the entire press box.
I was gonna say, nobody come after me. I'm not attacking anybody. I
never looked forward to doing that as much as I love New Orleans as a city, and I do. It was never a fun time when you worked for the team, and the Bucs got spanked in that building so many
hosting
times.
the Super Bowl this year. Hosting the Super Bowl this year, New Orleans.
Yes, it is.
So if either of us are going to be there, we're going to have to give a full report on whether or not the tea sticks around to halftime.
Well, that's the NFL is in charge of that at that point. So that's a whole different animal there. It's not the Saints staff that's dictating any of that. But I mean, maybe it was worse because we were the Bucs and we were a division rival, and they decided that they weren't going to feed us or give us tea.
They're not going to do that. They're not. Although, you know, anything to win a football.
I wouldn't blame them. Honestly, like I love
anything to win a football game, you know?
I love the pettiness, quite honestly. So if that was their aim, like more power to you, Saints.
It would embody the Evans-Lattimore rivalry. You know, it could be so like that could be the media's version of
so sad that's being
There's still a chance. There's still a chance.
There is. If they meet in the playoffs.
Washington wins the division. Bucks get into the wild card.
Yes.
And we get Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore playoff version. That's what the people need. Before we get to our next game, this show is sponsored by our friends over at BetterHelp. With this being sort of the time of the year where we've got Halloween, it's masks, it's costumes, and all this kinds of stuff. I know that people out there can sometimes feel like they're wearing a costume or a mask in real life. Like I have been there at certain point in times where I felt like I couldn't be my genuine self, whether it was work and social settings with your family, your friends, whatever it is. This time of year, The costumes, it's great for Halloween, not great for the emotions. Therapy, it's a great way to learn how to accept all parts of yourself so you can take off the mask, take off the costume, all that stuff. I've been doing therapy for over a year and a half, almost 2 years now, and it's been great for exactly that. A lot of different reasons, but specifically becoming comfortable of who I am in my own skin. And that's been great when it comes to recognizing the things that I do well and the things that I naturally like about myself, and the other things where, hey, I could use a little bit of help in this area to be better as a person. So you're able to balance both of those things and have real growth. Therapy, it's a great tool to help you have a better understanding of your mind, how it works, why you react to things the way that you do, your own patterns of behaviors, and it helps you improve them in the way that you want. It's not just for people struggling with something specific, although it can be great for that as well. If you were thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is convenient, it's flexible, it's an entirely online way to get therapy that is right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/PFF to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFF. Speaking of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I didn't do this on purpose, but what a beautiful transition here. The San Francisco 49ers travel to Tampa Bay to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I saw, obviously we're doing this on Wednesday, Christian McCaffrey could be involved in the offense in this game. We will see. The window is open for him to be activated. We'll see if he is actually in the lineup for this one. Obviously, I think that could be a little bit of a plus factor. Don't mean to spoil it if that is yours, but what's your matchup that matters first before we get to that?
Yeah, it's something that the Bucs just are going to need to do well and just haven't so far since Mike and Chris went down. We know that Mike Evans has got back on the practice field on Wednesday, worked out with trainers. He's on track to come back after the bye week, but that does not factor into this game.
Right.
So get this rushing offense going. I mean, we've seen a vast improvement overall in the Tampa Bay's rushing offense from years past, specifically. They're top 10 right now in rushing, but that did not happen. That did not come to fruition against the Kansas City Chiefs. They failed to crack 100 yards rushing on the ground. And that is something that, again, you need when you're playing these like high caliber opponents, when you're going against a defense like San Francisco's. I really need this offense to be as multidimensional as possible. And without your top two receivers, I mean, I know how much, like, listen, this is not K-Dot and erasure. I appreciate everything that K-Dot has been able to do so far in those guys' absence. He came in huge for Baker Mayfield against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's going to need to continue, but rely on the three-headed monster that you have in your offensive backfield. Now, San Francisco isn't going to make it easy. They're top 10 in rushing defense, but I really do think that in order for the Bucs to be competitive in this game, to potentially win this game, which could matter a whole lot when you're talking about a fellow NFC opponent,
right?
You need to get things going on the ground. Please, guys.
I think that how the Bucs are going to play Brock Purdy is very intriguing in this game because the Bucs by nature with Todd Bowles are a team that likes to blitz a lot. It is funny watching these two in Brian Flores and Todd Bowles just be number one and number two in the NFL at total blitzes called. Like they just love it. Right now, Brian Flores has a 2-play lead on Todd Bowles.
Okay.
How many blitzes that they have called, but they are the number one and number two team in the NFL. It is part of their defensive style. It is what they like to do.
Right.
Now, an interesting wrinkle into that is that the last 3 weeks that we have had here have been the lowest blitz counts from the Buccaneers so far this season. So what are we doing here? Are we turning over a new leaf? This is a new Todd Bowles. What are we doing? So though they are still number two in the NFL at total blitzes called, they aren't doing it as much as they were at the early parts of the season or as much as Todd Bowles typically does. Now, it's interesting for this game in particular, because if we turn back the clock to earlier this season, when the San Francisco 49ers went to Minnesota and had to play Brian Flores blitzed the crap out of him. It was the most blitzes that Brock Purdy faced in a single game, and that was the game that Brock Purdy had a 48.4 passing grade, 2 turnover-worthy plays against the blitz, 3 turnover-worthy plays overall, and it was the game where Purdy went up to Brian Flores and patted him on the shoulder and was just like, "Scheme is crazy, man." Like he had no idea what was coming at him at any time. Do the Bucs switch things up this week and get back to that heavy blitz format, knowing that the last 3 weeks they have done it less than they normally do. So I think there was a little bit of a trend going on over these last 3 weeks. Do they break it here against Purdy? Does Todd Bowles believe that the success against Purdy will come with blitzing more? I'm really intrigued to see if that's the case, because normally when you blitz Brock Purdy, he's not that bad. It was really just that game. It was that volume. It was that type of blitzing that Flores was throwing at him that really hurt him. He's had some good games against the blitz even this season. So it's not like he's bad no matter what if you blitz him. It's got to be a good game plan incorporating the blitz. Todd Bowles is willing to do it. Yeah. But that to me is a big time matchup that matters, of how much Todd Bowles is going to be willing to blitz him, and then what Purdy looks like against the blitz in this game. What about a plus factor for you?
Yeah, I appreciate that call out, especially because if you look at what Brian Flores and how he blitzes, it's all of these certain like simulated pressures and then just different pressures where you're getting DBs involved, you're getting linebackers, like off-ball linebackers involved. Like the blitz is coming from areas you don't expect it, and that is what threw Brock Purdy off so badly. And it's something that Todd Bowles is absolutely capable of too. And I think when you talk about the fact that over the last 3 weeks, the Bucs haven't blitzed as much, I think you can directly attribute that to the health of Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea now on that interior, and then being able to get pressure themselves in a 4-man rush. And that's ideally how you want to operate, I think, in this defense that stays in its flex package so much, where you do have those 4-man fronts. If you can get pressure from Vita Vea, who already has 5 sacks on the season, by the way, his high is 6.5 for a career, so he is on pace to shatter that. If you look at this game against how they played Patrick Mahomes, who is incredibly mobile and can improvise so much, it was Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea that got the bulk of the pressure on him and got the bulk of the sacks on him. So that's going to be interesting to see if, you switch it up now against a guy where you have seen Brian Flores have a lot of success against him, and it was not only bringing pressure from that interior, but it was getting a bunch of different guys involved, and it was a very blitz-heavy game plan. So is that going to matter? And then specifically with this Bucs defense, something they have not been doing well this season is 3rd and 4th down in particular. This is courtesy of Greg Auman, actually, my coworker who is on the Tampa Bay beat. Shout out Greg. They've already given up 14 4th down conversions this season, which puts them on pace for 26, which is easily the most allowed by any team in any season in NFL history. That is not a record you want to break. That is not a record you want to be on pace for. That is something that is going to keep these guys on the field, and it's something that the Niners aren't going to be afraid to do either if it comes to those 4th and short situations with how well they run the ball. So this conversion rate of 74% on 4th down, which is the 4th highest in the league right now, not good. That cannot be a trend that continues. Can you get your defense off the field and keep this offense, in particular, if it has Christian McCaffrey, off the field as well?
I think Baker Mayfield is going to come out slinging in this game. Like I don't necessarily look at not having Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as a deterrent from him doing that. Obviously, you shouted out Cade Otton there, but I think Sterling Shepard had a really good showing, certainly on Monday Night Football as well. We know Rachaad White can get involved in the passing game. Trey Palmer was a little bit quieter of a night for him, but you're getting some of those younger guys involved in the offense. I know just overall, it's hard to pass the football when your top 2 wide receivers, especially one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL, both go down. It's not ideal, but I still think that Mayfield is going to, keep them in the hunt. But the reason why I brought that up is because my plus factor is also sort of a negative about the Buccaneers, because if they don't raise their defensive floor, whatever Mayfield's going to do, I just don't think that it's necessarily going to be enough. You look specifically, my plus factor is George Kittle and how the Buccaneers linebackers are going to cover him, because right now, George Kittle, 1st in PFF grade amongst tight ends, 2nd in receiving yards, 1st in receiving touchdowns, tied for 2nd in catches, 1st in catches of 15 or more yards for tight ends. I mean, this dude's at the very top. He's a top 3 tight end in almost every single category that you are going to measure. He's going up against a Buccaneers linebacker group that in coverage is bottom 5 in total coverage grade, EPA per pass allowed, and receiving yards allowed to tight ends this season. It is a true elite strength on terrible weakness for the Buccaneers. And so I wanted to make sure that I pointed out, hey, I think that Baker Mayfield's going to have you in it. I don't think that he's going to be an issue in this game. I think they're going to be able to run the ball decently well because the Niners haven't been great at run defense so far this season. So I think that the offense isn't going to be terrible for Tampa Bay. But the floor of their weaknesses on defense have to be much better than what they have been recently, specifically against tight ends. I mean, Kelsey went off against them this past week.
What Travis Kelce was able to do and how the Chiefs attacked them that way.
If you let Kittle go off for over 100 yards, I mean, it's just going to make things way too easy for a Niners and Shanahan offense that really knows how to move the ball. So I think that that's a major plus factor here. It's got to be much better from those Bucs linebackers specifically when covering George Kittle. Maybe it involves, you getting your safeties a lot more involved on how you're trying to cover these tight ends. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but it's got to be a lot better than what it has been recently. Steelers Commanders, next game I want to hit. Matchup that matters. What do you got?
TJ Watt versus Washington.
Him? Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yep. Washington O-line, their tackles in particular, because of the fact that, again, I just think that this is a huge opportunity for the Steelers to exploit a matchup. Now, the Washington O-line, it's actually good. Like, they have been doing incredibly well. They have outperformed any expectations so far this season. I am not here to hate on the Washington Commanders offensive line. I happen to like it. And they do really well, especially now that Jaden Daniels is starting to open up the playbook a little bit more. I guess Cliff Kingsbury is. And Jaden Daniels is pushing the ball down the field. I believe the last I checked, which was last week, he had the 5th longest average depth of target, which was a direct contrast to the first 4 games of the season when he had like the 10th, or like he was ranked 40th in average depth of target, so among quarterbacks. So this is something that the offensive line has been able to open up for him and make him feel protected. But now you go against the Steelers defensive line. Now you go against TJ Watt, who is has the 2nd overall PFF grade, 93.7 among edge defenders, 93.2 run defense grade, which is going to come in handy against the Commanders and what they do with Brian Robinson. You've got 90.9 pass rushing grade, which ranks 3rd, 22 pressures. So it's not as if I think that's where we're seeing a little bit of a drop off in production, if you want to call it that, for TJ Watt. But again, he has the potential to be a game wrecker. And now the Steelers have added Preston Smith, who fits their scheme beautifully well. How much he's going to play, I don't know. But he certainly should be in the edge rushing rotation, which means attention will be taken off of doubling up TJ Watt when you have to pay attention to a guy like Preston Smith. So this defensive line in general now has so much more versatility with the addition of Preston Smith, and going against these Commanders offensive tackles who, as far as grades go, pass blocking wise, 16th, and overall grades 16th among offensive lines. That's going to be a huge thing to see if this line can really hold up against one of the best defensive fronts in football.
I agree. I think this is a huge matchup that's going to, determine this game. The Commanders' offensive line, again, I'm glad that you gave them their flowers there. They have the 4th highest pass blocking grade in the NFL so far this year. Kudos to them and the great job that they have done. They're going up against 2 legitimate Defensive Player of the Year candidates in TJ Watt and Cam Hayward, and that's not even mentioning, Keanu Benton and Alex Highsmith and now Preston Smith and Nate Herbig. And it's so many waves of guys that they could throw you. So this will be their toughest test yet, obviously, with the Steelers being the best defensive line in the NFL. So that's a huge matchup that matters. I am very excited to get Mike Sainristil in the face of George Pickens to see what we can get from this matchup, because these are
you've been on Mike Sainristil for the last 3 weeks, and I really appreciate it.
And he's had some great matchup. Like it was Malik Neighbors the week prior. Now it's against George Pickens. Like these are feisty matchups for a guy that I know is never going to back down from these. So you can factor in Marshawn Lattimore, and I think that he'll play a role here. I don't know how much he's going to get matched up against Pickens, but I think that Russell Wilson is actually doing a very nice job with this passing offense. I think specifically with the touch pass and the deep ball passes, he is diversifying the passing attack more than Justin Fields was able to. Don't want to take anything away from a good year that Justin Fields was having. He was bringing a great rushing element, and I thought he was even passing the ball better than he had in the past. He was reading the field well. He was seeing the things. He was seeing the field well, but Fields is a fast ball thrower. And sometimes in the NFL, you've got to be able to throw a changeup and a slider, and you just got to be able to throw the ball at different angles, put different air under the football, rhythm and timing, things like that. And Russell Wilson just does that at such a high level, or at least he has throughout his career. We didn't see it much with the Broncos, certainly last year or the year before, but we saw some flashes of it with the Steelers once he was put in there as the starter. So George Pickens, a big benefactor of that. Can you stop him? Because if you can, then all of a sudden the Steelers offense gets really predictable. And I think that goes right into my plus factor, and that's Najee Harris. Now, Najee Harris has had some really good games over the last 3 games specifically. I know they just had a bye, but over the last 3 games the Steelers have played, he has rushed for over 100 yards, and it's not just that. His grades are good too. 83.9 rushing grade in those 3 games that he has played. So the offense has become so much more balanced with Russell Wilson out there, and how he is able to sort of diversify where the ball goes in the passing game. That's lightening things up for the run game. Najee Harris, I don't want to take anything away from him there. He individually is also playing very well. And if he can continue to play at a very high level, then the Steelers can remain balanced. You got a chance in this game. And I think that's really what they would need on that side of the ball. So that's my matchup that matters in plus factor. What's your plus factor in this game?
Well, it's the new arrival in Pittsburgh, which is Mike Williams, which is kind of funny to say because I know that he wasn't super productive, obviously, for the Jets, and him and Aaron Rodgers couldn't get on the same page. And honestly, he got a couple more targets than I even thought he would after he had that really bad drop a few games ago. But that being said, the type of receiver that Mike Williams is, he has 7 catches this year, gaining 15 or more yards. That is crucial to what Russell Wilson wants to do in Pittsburgh, which is throw the deep ball outside the numbers down the field. That is where Mike Williams can shine. He is big, he's got length, and this is kind of his bread and butter. He's got 5 contested catches on the year, 9 catches gaining a first down. I mean, this is something that is missing right now from the Steelers passing attack, and it's something that Russell Wilson wants to do. So now you are getting him a guy that can absolutely do that. On top of having George Pickens, who I think is a wonderful young receiver, and he seems to be clicking with Russell Wilson as well. This is now a pretty versatile passing attack in Pittsburgh. And I mean, we know that this is a defensive-led team, but if you can actually get some offensive production here, now you're talking about a real, true, not just postseason berth, but postseason run for the Pittsburgh Steelers, even in the AFC North.
Yeah, I think it's a great call, though. I didn't mention Mike Williams by name just because I was thinking of all the other new that was going on here, but this is also a major factor because he does now give them sort of that same archetype that George Pickens is. And very clearly they are okay leaning into that. Now you just have another player who could do that sort of stuff. So love the call out there. I think that's a great plus factor here for this game. Titans Chargers, next game I want to get to. I think this opens up the 4 p.m. slate here for us. My matchup that matters.
Chargers, 4 p.m., man. Woo!
Yeah, no, everybody's looking forward. We're going to be glued to the couch here for this one. No, but there is some exciting stuff to get to. Specifically, you watch one of the best defenses in the NFL, right? I was on this very program like about 4 weeks ago, and I said, hey, Chargers are number 1 in the NFL in points allowed. Their defense is fantastic. Well, I should say they're number 1 in limiting teams. They have given up the fewest points per game. So they are literally number 1 in the NFL in defense. And I said, are they a little fraudulent, though? They haven't really played any great offenses. This is just a damn good defense. Coaching matters 101 is what we are watching with the Los Angeles Chargers, specifically how they defend the run, right? There's not a ton of things that you can immediately change when it's a brand new coaching staff. And sometimes you got to wait to get your star players in there, whatever. But the fundamental part of things, being a low penalty team, playing better in the trenches, and specifically running the football and defending the run, those are things that every coach can do at an elevated level right when they get in. And when you look at what the Chargers are doing against the run this year, number 1 in the NFL in EPA per rush allowed. Now, that's a big deal for this game because Tony Pollard is rushing the ball well for the Titans. 83.1 rushing grade. Very clearly, when the Titans are able to move the ball on offense, it's often because they are able to lean on the run game very, very well. If you are taking Tony Pollard out of this game, which the Chargers have the ability to do, I do not have a lot of faith in the Titans offense. I just don't. Right. So to me, you could sit here and say like, the Chargers, they're not that potent of an offense, although they're playing a lot better. We'll get to that in a second. The Titans might be able to get them. It might be a close game. Chargers might hold this team to less than 10 points this week. If they cannot run the ball with Tony Pollard, I am really afraid for even how well at all the Titans are going to be able to move the ball and even get into scoring range outside of maybe getting a turnover here or there. So this to me could be a single-digit scoring week for the Tennessee Titans as they travel to Los Angeles to play the #1 rush defense in the NFL. So that's my matchup that matters. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, that is, I think, the matchup that does matter if you're going to pick out one singular one. So instead of rehashing all of that, I'll just go to the other side of things where you mentioned it or alluded to it, and I'm going to allude to it even more in my plus factor. But this offense is playing a lot better in Los Angeles and for the Chargers. You see this kind of expand beyond the ground and pound, rushing first defense or offense. And seeing Justin Herbert kind of play up to the level that we're used to seeing him at. But a lot of that has to do with the Chargers offensive line and that the fact that they are playing better. That against this Titans defensive line, which has some pieces on it, especially when you consider that rookie T'Vondre Sweat, who, the more pass rush moves he adds to his arsenal, the more dangerous he's going to become. But this Chargers offensive line, we know that they're good at run blocking. They're 13th. They rank 13th, 70.9 PFF run blocking grade. They're 23rd in pass blocking grade right now, 62.6, but that has kind of trended upward. And there's 72 pressures allowed in pass protection is tied for the 12th fewest. So they are protecting Justin Herbert, and he is in turn becoming more and more productive as the weeks go on and as this offense starts to evolve under what Jim Harbaugh is trying to do. So I can roll that into my plus factor, which is in fact Justin Herbert. Since week 5,
has to be
among quarterbacks, 91.3 PFF grade, which ranks third, 90.6 passing grade, that ranks third. 86 of 132, 1,147 yards, which ranks 10th in that span, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and 11 big-time throws. That's the big thing. You're taking care of the football, but you're still throwing the ball down the field, or at least in those big-time situations. That ranks tied for second in that span, and just 2 turnover-worthy plays in that span as well. So Justin Herbert is productive. He's starting to push the ball down the field. He is still taking care of the football, though, and this all starts to kind of, you realize why Jim Harbaugh is the old school guy that he is. You get the run game going first, you get the run defense going first, build off of that, and it turns out well most of the time. I think he came back into the league at just the right time.
I mean, certainly to get a quarterback like Justin Herbert, who is playing at a level where he could beat anybody in the NFL every week. I really do agree with that. I know it's a team game, and obviously it's more than just the quarterback, but as long as the Chargers are on their P's and Q's, Justin Herbert is playing at a level where he can beat any team any week. And I think over the last 3 games in particular, you've seen from this Los Angeles Chargers receiving group, Josh Palmer, Ladd McConkey, even Quentin Johnston, all above 70 receiving grades. So this group is coming along. Herbert's playing at elite level. The receivers are not playing at an elite level, but playing at a high level enough to where you could be a benefactor of what Herbert is doing and how in rhythm and how in the zone this dude is. I would be afraid to play Justin Herbert if I was any team in the NFL. So I think that we could see some more really good stuff from him this week, even against a pretty solid Titans defense. Jets Cardinals, 425 game here. This one's in Arizona. A lot of people on the Arizona Cardinals hype train now with them at the very top of that division. It's a very competitive, tight division, which it feels like it always is in the NFC West.
Yep.
What are we thinking about this one? Matchup that matters. What do we got here?
Yeah, matchup that matters / matchup I just want to watch. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. and Sauce Gardner. I mean, that's just going to be fun. It's 2 very feisty young players on either side. Marvin Harrison Jr. receiving stats among wide receivers, 445 yards, which is 26th, 5 receiving touchdowns, which is top 10. It's tied for 6th. And then you've got 14 catches gaining 15 or more yards. That's tied for 10th among wide receivers right now. And that is going to be the key. And can Sauce Gardner limit those big plays, the ones that go down the field that Kyler Murray just rips to Marvin Harrison Jr.? It's so much fun. And at this point, Sauce Gardner has only allowed 1 touchdown, only 10 catches allowed for a first down. So how do those 2 match up with each other? I just more than the matchup that matters. I just think it's going to be a fun one.
This is my plus factor here with Sauce Gardner, because we've only got 1 game this year where he has graded above an 80 with a coverage grade, and he's only got three total games where he has graded above a 75 in terms of coverage grade. Shoot, it above 71. And when you look last year, I mean, I'm just doing math off the top of my head here. He had 12 games where that was the case last year, 13 games where that was the case last year. And I think he had 8 the year before. So to only have 3 and only 1 game above an 80, it's just not very Sauce Gardner-like. Cornerback is very up and down all the time, so I don't want to be too harsh on this, but to me, he's the big plus factor here, exactly why you highlighted the matchup that matters, because if he could take away Marvin Harrison Jr., if he could play him really well, then all of a sudden I think that changes the math in their favor a little bit. I will say this too. The Cardinals defense in single coverage is going to mean a ton in this game, because if there is anything that I have learned from the New York Jets through 9 weeks of the season, they're going to play iso ball, and that is just the way their offense is going to go. And if it is not clicking, then it's going to look like the first half of that Thursday night football game that we saw against the Houston Texans, which was ugly. Mm-hmm. And then in the second half, when it's clicking, it looks fun as hell. It's Garrett Wilson, it's Devontae Adams, it's Aaron Rodgers throwing the beautiful flick passes to the sideline. It's just going straight to the receiver, right? It's all the beautiful timing stuff. It's wonderful. And it's some of the most picturesque offense that you can have when that kind of single coverage ISO offense works. When it doesn't, it is barren. You do not get any sort of movement. It's 3 and outs. It's low EPA. It's everything. So the Jets right now, 116 passing attempts versus single coverage. That is the 5th most in the NFL. And they are 10th in big time throw percentage against single coverage. So it is not only something that they are comfortable going after, it is something that they invite. They invite teams to be able to do this, because often it's a really difficult thing to do. Complete these passes against single coverage, especially when you have the corners to be able to do it. Now the Cardinals, 20th in the NFL in passing grade allowed when they're in that single coverage format. So to me, this is an area where the Cardinals have to be better in single coverage situations, because this is exactly what the Jets want to do. And if you could slow them down here, then obviously we have seen a recipe like what Houston gave us last Thursday, where you could just halt this offense altogether. And if you can't stop them, well, then it's the one-handed catches, it's the beautiful toe taps, it's the touchdowns, it's the points, it's the everything. So how the Cardinals specifically can play in single coverage situations this week will mean a lot going up against the New York Jets, which invites that to be basically their entire passing game. But what's a plus factor for you?
Yeah, I'm going to the other side of the ball for the Cardinals again, it's James Conner. And he was such a huge part of why the Cardinals were able to score 29 points versus this Bears defense that hadn't given up more than 21 prior to coming into this game. And it's also a game where Kyler Murray only threw for 154 yards and no touchdowns. It was the ground, and it was again, that rushing offense from James Conner. And then you've got the secondary threat in DeMarcado, who rips off that run again at the end of the first half. I'll just never be over it, because it was just nobody's supposed to score on that play. If James Conner can keep this up against this Jets defense, that again is going to, and with the scramble threat that Kyler Murray is too. I mean, he factors into this, and his little sonic legs. He factors into this incredibly well when James Conner gets going. And I think that the Cardinals have seen a lot of success when James Conner is rolling. And so can he do that again against this Jets defense, which has tapered off since the firing of Robert Saleh?
Is it trademark at this point? Are we allowed to say Sonic Legs now that Sonic and Knuckles are in Detroit?
I know. I thought that.
I don't even know if we're allowed to do that. I don't even know if we're allowed to do that.
We need to come up with something else. What's maybe like the Roadrunner or something? He's like
could be. Don't hate the Roadrunner. Yeah,
I don't. I love watching Kyler Murray run. I think it's great. It's so much fun and it's so entertaining.
Before we move on to the next game, I misspoke. The Cardinals aren't 20th in the NFL in single coverage grade. They are 15th in the NFL in single coverage grade. But when it comes to EPA per play allowed against the pass, they are 26. So it is, again, an area where they struggle. They need to step up a little bit more, because we know the Jets are going to pass a lot out of those situations. So just wanted to clarify myself there before we moved on. Eagles at Cowboys.
Talk about vibes, man.
This one's, again, tough. I agree with Dan Orlovsky with what he said earlier this week when he said there is no team that does not know themselves less than the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
I mean, for them to be buyers at the deadline is insane, especially knowing that Dak Prescott is hurt. You know Dak Prescott is hurt, and you are buyers at the deadline?
If I have to hear one more time about how Cooper Rush is 5-1 as a starter, I don't even know, man.
I guess maybe that's the matchup that matters for me is Cooper Rush's record, because the only real chance I think, and I can wrap my plus factor into this as well because it goes into it. The only chance I really think the Cowboys have in this game, maybe getting Micah Parsons and DaRon Bland back, is if Jalen Hurts is a version of Jalen Hurts that he hasn't been over the last 3 weeks. Because since week 6, Jalen Hurts has been awesome. He is tied for 5th in PFF passing grade. He is tied for 6th in rushing grade for quarterbacks. He has over 800 passing yards. He got 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I mean, like, this dude is playing at a really, really efficient level, Jalen Hurts is. You basically have to get multiple takeaways from Jalen Hurts in this game to have a chance. So that's the plus factor for me is that DaRon Bland comes back and he plays, obviously led the league in interceptions last year. So that's what you need. That's entirely what you need. Because outside of that, the run game in Dallas sucks. The run defense in Dallas sucks. And oh, by the way, you're going up against Saquon Barkley. That's not great.
So reverse hurdling, guys.
Yeah, he's toying with people so much that he's reverse hurdling. Before it was always toying with him. Look at he's hurdling it. Saquon Barkley's like, I'm going to hurdle without even looking at him.
I'm going to hurdle him backwards. Not even know where I'm going.
It's hard to find a matchup in this game.
Yeah.
Especially with Dak Prescott not in it.
Yeah.
That gives you any hope that the Cowboys win this football game. No. So I don't have a matchup that matters for the Cowboys. The only matchup that matters to me is if Jalen Hurts doesn't take care of the football, because turnovers, anything could happen. Once you start losing the turnover differential by 2 or more, anything in the world could happen. But to me, outside of that, I don't see a world the Cowboys win this football game. I really don't.
And especially when, I mean, you look, AJ Brown was back at practice. He was limited, but it looks like he's going to be okay for this one. Obviously, we're doing this on a Wednesday, so we don't know for sure. But Jalen Hurts has also been throwing the ball down the field once he got his top 2 receivers back. He's 8 for 13 on 20-plus yard throws, 275 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. So this is something that it's since week 6 touchdowns, excuse me. This is something that he's doing extraordinarily well and should maybe present an opportunity to be able to pick him off. If this ball is floating through the air for a while, can you somehow, some way force those into like kind of turnover worthy plays? But when you have Devontae Smith and AJ Brown as your receivers, I mean, those guys, I have such a wonderful rapport with Jalen Hurts. So I'm with you. He was my plus factor too, because he's sneaking into MVP combos at this point, given what he's been able to do since week 6. And this Cowboys team, I mean, you're right. Dave Hellman and I had a conversation about this on the NFL on Fox podcast on Monday, or it came out Tuesday, where before the trade deadline, we were like, it makes all the sense in the world for the Cowboys to be sellers.
Mm-hmm.
But do we trust that Jerry Jones thinks that way? And sure enough, they were buyers. They overpaid, by the way, for the return that they got, which, again, you could almost justify if Dak Prescott, the highest paid quarterback in the league, was on the field for you. But he's not. And in the same breath you told us he was going on IR, you told us that you traded a 4th round pick, by the way, which is the round that you got Dak Prescott in, and countless other Cowboys, by the way, Cowboys starters. And you traded away a 4th round pick for Jonathan Mingo, who, nothing against Jonathan Mingo, but I think there was a consensus across the league that was an overpay. So you're right. The Dallas Cowboys do not have an identity. They don't know where their future goes from here. They're trying to stay relevant at all costs rather than just admitting, all right, you know what? We've got some big paychecks coming down the pipe when you talk about Micah Parsons and all this other stuff. Maybe we take this opportunity to be a little bit sellers, get some more of those, stockpile those draft picks. We're going to need some young talent, and we're going to need to hit on those draft picks because we're not going to be able to pay all of the guys that we have right now. I mean, if they were smart, like I would love to see Zach Martin be set free of the Cowboys and be able to chase a ring and add that to this already all pro Hall of Fame caliber resume. I cannot. I can go on and on about the Dallas Cowboys, unfortunately, and I don't see, especially against a division rival, I don't see this going well for them.
It's Jerry just doesn't handle like not being relevant well at all whatsoever.
No.
Basically, anytime the Cowboys like haven't been relevant, they've made a head coaching change over the last 25 years, and I think that that's probably going to be the case at the end of the season because I just don't think it's going to end well for the Dallas Cowboys. And so this is a situation where the Eagles should absolutely win this game. You have David in the chat saying Sirianni's going to find a way to keep it close. This is a divisional game, so I don't know, maybe.
I know,
but
maybe.
It's.
Talk about vibes. The vibes are only good in Philly because they're winning.
Micah better have 8 sacks in this game. 2 of them better be strip sacks. 1 of them better be picked up and returned for a touchdown. And if he does, that's your plus factor, I suppose. Let's go to Sunday Night Football here. Lions at Texans. Texans coming off a tough loss on Thursday Night Football where things just did not look good for them. But they're dealing with some injury. They're still going to be dealing with injuries going into this one. But we get Nico Collins back in this game. We get Nico back?
Maybe.
I feel like maybe, feels like it's trending in that direction.
Right.
So
for sure.
What's your matchup that matters here for Sunday Night Football?
I'm going back to the trenches because that's what
I know.
That's what the Lions do so damn well on both sides of it. Obviously one of the best offensive lines, but their defensive line specifically against this Houston O-line because this Detroit D-line, despite suffering the loss of Aiden Hutchinson, has been able to regroup based almost solely because of Aleem McNeil and DJ Reader, who aren't getting enough play. We're not talking about them enough and what they've been able to do on that defensive interior, which has made things easier for this Detroit defense to absorb the hit of losing Aiden Hutchinson. And now you go out and you get Zadarius Smith. What's really interesting about the way that Detroit has approached the pass rush in particular, since losing Aiden Hutchinson, they actually have a 5.1% higher pressure rate than they did with Aiden Hutchinson, but it's because they've increased their blitz rate from 31.6% to 38.9% in his absence. So that is the biggest thing that Aaron Glenn did to kind of make up for losing Aiden Hutchinson, where he trusted his line to get pressure with 4 before. Now he's blitzing more guys. That's also involving different guys like Brian Branch, even Kirby Joseph, who's their free safety, kind of gets in on it. They have so many different chess pieces in that defensive secondary. The 2 of the 3 highest graded safeties in the league right there. And he's involving them in the pass rush too, because they both like to hit people. So now with Zadarius Smith, do you continue that trend of still blitzing more, or do you trust him to kind of pick up some of that slack that Aiden Hutchinson left? I don't know the answer to that, but I know that I'm going to really enjoy watching against this Houston offensive line, which has been kind of struggling this season. 65.3 PFF grade, it ranks 25th. 69.8 pass blocking grade, that ranks 16th. 18 sacks allowed in pass protection, that's tied for the 4th most. So this is what I'm going to be watching, how Zadarius Smith kind of changes how the Detroit Lions do things. I don't know. It's going to be really fun.
Obviously, I think it's a good call out with this being the first preview show after the final trade deadline, and we had a pretty decently active one. So we've talked about some guys who have been traded in new spots here throughout the show. And I think obviously Zadarius Smith is a big one because we've talked about edge rusher really ever since Aiden Hutchinson went down as a potential add for the Detroit Lions. And I think that's specifically a really good way that we could see what the changes might be there. I sort of have an interesting one here because I think the Lions offensive line is really good. I think it's one of the better units in the NFL. And I was thinking about them versus the Texans. And we sit here and we go like, okay, well, if the Texans get pressure and, let's talk about like Penei Sewell versus Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. And like, we could talk about the offensive linemen going up against each other. But I actually wanted to look at it a different way. My matchup that matters is actually if the Lions do their job very well up front and they get, and the Texans don't get pressure, what's the coverage like when they don't get pressure? And the Texans are actually still a top 15 team in the NFL. They're top half of the NFL in total coverage grade when they don't get any pressure, when there's zero pressure recorded. So we always love to say, like, oh, like this matchup of them getting pressure. And I think Penei Sewell is one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL. I just think the Lions' offensive line in general is really, really good. So what if they do their job really well? Is this actually that big of a deal breaker if Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter don't get pressure on the Lions? And I don't know that it necessarily is. I'm not saying it's going to be like, that if they can't get pressure, the Texans are going to win this football game. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. But when I started to research this and I've sort of found these numbers, it might not be as big of an issue as we normally would think that it would be if the Lions offensive line actually wins this matchup because of how good it feels like the Texans have been in coverage so far this season, which kind of brings me into my plus factor here. I think Jalen Petrie could be a big-time plus factor in this game. Petrie has the highest grade of the full-time players on the coverage side of things for the Houston Texans. He's got 6 forced incompletions. He's got 1 interception. He's got a 69.5 coverage grade. And if you remember specifically the 1 interception that he had against Anthony Richardson, he is ball hawk in that throw. I mean, this is an aggressive player. I remember watching him on the sidelines at the Senior Bowl, and he was doing the same thing. He did the same thing at Baylor. The defense that he was in at Baylor, at the Senior Bowl, now with the Texans, is they want to let him have the freedom to have his eyes on the quarterback because he reads things really well and he's really aggressive. And this is a player who, again, if you're not getting pressure, maybe you might have an opportunity. Goff doesn't do this very often. I'm not trying to say this is any sort of Goff slander because he's playing very efficient. He's playing great. But maybe you get a play in there where Petrie reads it right. Lions like to do a lot of stuff over the middle. Maybe you can cut over the middle, get yourself an interception, get what you need to have a upper hand on the turnover battle to win this football game against a really, really good football team. Lions are one of the only teams in the NFL. They're actually one of 2 teams that have an EPA per play in the top 10 on both the offense and defensive side of the football. So we already know this is just a really, really good Detroit Lions team. You've got to get that advantage somewhere. And to me, that's where it could come. Maybe Jalen Petrie could truly be that plus factor to swing things in your favor. So those are the 2 areas that I'm really looking at for this game. What is your plus factor here for this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go on the other side of things, and you look at C.J. Stroud versus man coverage in particular, because that's something that I think that you can kind of exploit with this Detroit Lions team when you look at their outside corners. Now, like I talked about, they've got 2 of the top 3 highest graded safeties, their secondary, their coverage grades, everything as a result is really good in Detroit. Top to bottom, this defense under Aaron Glenn is great. But C.J. Stroud, and they do play a lot of man coverage, CJ Stroud isn't particularly good against man coverage. 56.9 completion rate versus man, 79.9 passer rating, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He does still try to go for those big time throws when he recognizes the one-on-one coverage. It's more than double his overall average at 11.8% big time throw percentage for CJ Stroud. So can the Lions capitalize on that, or can CJ Stroud kind of shore up that aspect of his game? I think that's going to be a huge plus factor in how the Texans fare in particular and how CJ Stroud does, because without that, I don't see much of a shot right now for this Houston Texans offense going against a defense that is doing everything right now for the Detroit Lions, on top of the fact that their offense is seemingly scoring at will behind an incredibly efficient Jared Goff, so many different offensive weapons, and a 2-headed monster, Sonic and Knuckles, in that offensive backfield, who are capable of doing everything you could possibly want a running back to do between the 2 of them.
Last game we're talking about here for Week 10, it's the Miami Dolphins, thankfully, with Tua Tagovailoa back, taking on the Los Angeles Rams, because if Tua was not back, this would have been a ugly preview. The Rams are coming off an absolute thriller in overtime that we saw last week against the Seattle Seahawks. Dolphins, very close game against the Buffalo Bills as well. So Bills, one of the better teams in the NFL. They played them very tight. So this is not the Dolphins that it was, when they were going through a lot of their injuries a month ago. This is a different, new look Dolphins team. So for Monday Night Football in this matchup, what is your matchup that matters here, Carmen?
I think it's a Dolphins offensive line. And to their credit, they've been doing incredibly well. 51 pressures allowed in pass protection, that's the fewest. 30 quarterback hurries allowed, that's the fewest in the league. And can they hold up against a Rams defensive line that no longer includes Aaron Donald, but they did quite a few things to make up for that. And it's coming in the form of Kobe Turner and of Jared Verse in particular, who has 38 pressures. He's leading the league in pressure percentage. He's just on this incredible tear. I think that he is week by week locking up defensive rookie of the year. And it's just incredible to see what this Rams defensive line has done to kind of make up for what was going to be a really heavy lift in the fact that Aaron Donald is no longer there. They've done beautifully. They get pressure. Can this Dolphins offensive line continue to hold up in protection of Tua to then again so we can see more of those kind of chunk plays, pushing the ball down the field, those explosives that would have just been lacking when Tua is not in the lineup for the Miami Dolphins. This is, I think, just kind of the matchup that is going to determine whether or not the Dolphins are able to do that and therefore win the game.
I'm looking forward to, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua versus Jalen Ramsey, specifically because I was sort of underrating the impact that Jalen Ramsey has had this season. It's one of Jalen Ramsey's better years. 83.4 PFF grade, 82.7 coverage grade. It's second amongst corners when it comes to overall PFF grade, and it's third amongst corners when it comes to just straight up coverage grade. So he's allowed 6 catches for a first down, but he's got 2 forced incompletions. He's got that interception. Only 15 catches allowed on the season. And obviously he's going up against 2 of the best, right? These guys that he's going to get matched up against with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. So those guys are 2 of the best. They've got great chemistry with Matthew Stafford, who very clearly, the longer the game goes on, the more he just evolves, and it feels like he turns into Superman by the time we get into the fourth quarter and overtime. Do the Rams play the Chiefs this year? Because if they do, I mean, that fourth quarter is going to be the most must-watch television of all time, because it's going to be quarterbacks that the ball's not going to hit the ground once, and it's just going to be insane throws. That's the level of talent that we're talking about. Matthew Stafford playing at that level with as much experience as he has. It was just an unbelievable performance. Geno Smith, too. I don't want to take anything away from Geno Smith last week. Honestly, like, Geno was unbelievable as well. He had the 6 big-time throws, 7 if you include the no play, the one that was called back. But
I thought I was safe, like, checking out of that game, and then it entered into the fourth quarter, and I was like, oh, never mind. Let's go lock back in.
Dave Sofaro was telling me that the Chiefs do not play the Rams, so guess we'll have to wait for the Super Bowl if we want to match up like that. Which, holy cow, again, Stafford Mahomes Super Bowl fourth quarter. That would truly be the entire world watching the 2 best go at it. But I think that matchup
between the best offensive play callers too.
Absolutely, and I think that matchup between Jalen Ramsey and those 2 wide receivers is going to be a big one in this one. For my plus factor, again, this is another one where I didn't realize this until I looked up the numbers and researched it a little bit more. I was going to kind of go with Tyreek Hill, but Tyreek Hill even kind of had a big game last week. And all right, it hasn't been necessarily a vintage like Tyreek Hill totally takes over the game, but then I'm looking down the list and Jalen Waddle, -4 receiving yards in this game.
What are we doing?
And I looked at Jalen Waddle's receiving yards overall. He's on pace for career lows in every single category. Targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, everything. Jalen Waddle is on pace for career lows. We got to get that guy going, right? You've got to be able to match the 2-headed monster that the Rams have. You have one of your own, but it feels like that hasn't been the case. And obviously, there's been reason for that with Tua out of the lineup for most of this season, but he is back, and last week it was not good enough with Jalen Waddle. So he's got to be a lot more involved in this offense. They've got to get him going just as much as they have to get Tyreek Hill going. So that is my plus factor here. Let's get Jalen Waddle on the right side of things through the second half of this season.
Yeah, and that's why my plus factor didn't call out any specific player, but it was, again, those big-time plays over 20 yards. And I don't care how you do it, and you should absolutely get Jalen Waddle more involved in that, but it's something that the Dolphins were obviously lacking. They had the fewest plays gaining 20 or more yards in the league still, which at 18. But they have had 5 such plays in the last 2 games since Tua came back. So that's a better rate as far as pushing the ball down the field, trying to get those chunk plays. But you're totally right. That isn't just Tyreek Hill's responsibility. That is also the responsibility of Jalen Waddle. And then by default, that is Tua's responsibility to get it to both of these guys and to really stress the Rams' corners in that way, because otherwise I don't see them being able to keep pace with what this Rams passing attack is able to do.
All right, there we go. All the games of Week 10 packaged, previewed, sent to the people. There you go. Appreciate everybody watching and listening to the show, whether you are on audio or you're watching this bad boy live. For Carmen Vitali, I am Trevor Sikkema. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening to this edition of the Week 10 preview show here on the PFF NFL show. We will see you, of course, same time right here next week. See you guys then.